Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. Today, we hope to share with you a philosophical conversation on intelligence, consciousness, and the relevance of these concepts in an age of AI, artificial intelligence. AI is rapidly advancing, AI is transforming many areas of human endeavor, and it is encouraging us to pursue these quite fundamental lines of inquiry. So joining us today, in addition to me, Gennady Stolyarov II, chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, is our director of longevity outreach, Ben Balweg, and joining us from Nigeria is Frederick Onwuka. He is an AI futurist. He has written a fascinating book. It is The Great View of the Future, How AI Will Give Us a New Perspective. I would recommend this book, and we featured it previously in our virtual enlightenment salons. Most notably, Frederick was a guest now 2 years ago on our panel advocating for transhumanism in Africa. He had some very interesting remarks in that salon, so please do check it out. But now, 2 years later, we have had even more significant advancement in artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is embedded in many aspects of our lives. People use it to generate writing. People use it to generate images. Now people are using it to generate videos as well. Back in 2020 in Immortalists magazine, I wrote this article, Intelligence and Its Potential. The reason why there's a Facebook link here is because that is where you can see the pages of the article. The file for Immortalists magazine, the PDF file, is not online anymore, but I created screenshots of the pages so that you can read the article. Again, here is the Facebook link. Intelligence and Its Potential by Gennady Stolyarov II. Intelligence, although it is a commonly used term, often refers to multiple distinct ideas. 5 definitions offered by dictionary.com are the following. 1. Capacity for learning, reasoning, understanding, and similar forms of mental activity. Aptitude in grasping truths, relationships, facts, meanings, etc. 2. Manifestation of a high mental capacity. 3. The faculty of understanding. 4. Knowledge of an event, circumstance, etc., received or imparted. News, information. 5. The gathering or distribution of information, especially secret information. Some definitions focus on knowledge or information, whereas others focus on the ability to understand. Intelligence presupposes the existence of some entity which is intelligent, i.e., capable of gathering and understanding knowledge. The human mind can be said to be intelligent, but so can a dog that successfully learns a trick, or a computer system that learns how to play chess or drive a vehicle. Intelligence is thus distinct from consciousness, self-awareness, volition, free will, or even animate status, life, since many programs today can be considered forms of narrow, artificial intelligence, despite clearly not being alive or conscious, and acting in accordance with pre-programmed algorithms that nevertheless allow for sufficient variation to be able to respond to external circumstances in ways that are sometimes more accurate and efficacious than a human mind which is alive, conscious, and volitional. It is important to note that each definition of intelligence contains no specification of any origin or substrate. Intelligence is able to be biological or non-biological. It is not the material substance of the intelligent entity that is essential to the definition, but the capabilities. The substance matters only insofar as it either does or does not facilitate the capabilities of learning, reasoning, understanding, and efficaciously responding to one's environment. Of course, some combinations of physical matter will have those capabilities and others will not. Intelligence is an emergent property of matter arranged in certain intricately complex ways, just as life, consciousness, and volition are emergent properties as well, though distinct from intelligence. Intelligence can also be domain-specific, i.e., skill at a given task or knowledge of a given subject area, or general, i.e., able to be applied to a diverse set of tasks and subject areas. An artificial intelligence that can only play chess or only drive a vehicle is hence narrow in that it only possesses domain-specific intelligence. Humans today, however, also possess general intelligence, knowledge of how to learn, and ability to apply skills and ideas from one area to another quite different area. Hence, a human can learn both to operate a vehicle and to play chess, and many other activities besides. If a future artificial intelligence comes to have this broader learning ability, then it will be considered an artificial general intelligence, or AGI, which will have numerous implications as to the status of such an entity. An AGI would certainly have tremendous ability for productive work and contribution to the advancement of civilization, quickly developing skill sets in areas where the learning ability of biological humans would require years to reach comparable competence, if such an outcome is even attainable for unaugmented biological minds. The question remains, however, whether the arrival of such a flexible, generally deployable intelligence would necessarily be accompanied by an emergence of self-awareness on that entity's part, or whether such a faculty would require a separate, no less complex, and possibly complementary set of processes to coalesce into the emergent phenomenon we know to be consciousness. I am of the view that consciousness is certainly helpful to intelligence, but the two are nonetheless distinct. Intelligence refers to capabilities and functions which are externally, objectively observable, whereas consciousness requires an inner, subjective state of awareness. The aspect that both intelligence and consciousness have in common is the material nature of the constituent elements. Both intelligence and consciousness require some material substrate to operate, be it a biological organism or a silicon chip. If we see an entity that is materially constituted in a manner similar to ourselves, for instance, a human with biological organs and processes, then we can reason that an outward manifestation of intelligence in that human is indicative of inner consciousness, since this is what we ourselves experience. An outward manifestation of intelligence in a physically different entity, such as a robot or a program, for instance, would give rise to the question of which particular structural relationships give rise to self-awareness, and which material components can play analogous roles within such structures. For example, one can conceive of an artificial neuron being grafted onto a biological brain and beginning to participate in some of the functioning of that brain, perhaps replacing one of the biological neurons once the latter dies. In that case, the process of consciousness could proceed despite the gradual replacement of biological components with artificial ones. However, if an entity is designed from scratch using entirely inorganic components, with parts that structurally relate to one another to produce intelligent outcomes, but which might not be directly comparable to the human brain or nervous system, which aspects of the processes of that entity, if any, could potentially produce consciousness? And how would we be able to discern this? By extrapolation from the material underpinnings of our human conscious experience. Suffice it to say, significantly greater understanding of the human brain itself and more systematic reasoning regarding the processes that would suffice to produce the emergent phenomenon of consciousness would be needed to truly grasp these matters. Yet, with the rapid progress of artificial intelligence and the serious possibility of the emergence of artificial general intelligence during the first half of the 21st century, it is crucial for humans to consider how to act in regard to an entity that manifests not just domain-specific intelligence, but intelligence across most or all domains of human endeavor. Should an assumption of consciousness be made concerning such entities, even if the mechanisms of consciousness within them have not been completely elucidated? As Pavel Ilin, then the secretary of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, has emphasized, the consequences of either decision need to be considered. If one assumes that a sophisticated and intelligent entity is self-aware and treats it accordingly, then one might be mistaken, but the cost of a mistake is relatively mild, comparable to anthropomorphizing a vehicle or a piece of furniture, except the AGI would have more contributions to make even if it is devoid of self-awareness. However, if one makes the opposite mistake and assumes that an actually self-aware entity is not self-aware, the potential consequences could extend as far as the destruction of that self-awareness if the entity is seen purely in utilitarian terms and is capable of being sacrificed to a greater good in certain situations. It is therefore important to prepare for the emergence of artificially intelligent entities that may become self-aware, even if we cannot predict in advance at what threshold that self-awareness will be reached and by what means. Having a conceptual framework of rights to deal with this situation is essential for preventing future conflicts over the treatment of potentially sentient entities. It also would, as a beneficent side effect, increase the general degree of tolerance and appreciation within human societies for the diversity of beings who, despite their differences, would share in common the most important underlying traits that confer individuality, moral value, and the prerogative to be treated with dignity and respect. For this reason, the U.S. Transhumanist Party has adopted the Transhumanist Bill of Rights version 3.0, a systematic generalization of human rights to other sentient entities that may be developed or encountered in the proximate decades, including genetically modified humans, cyborgs, digital intelligences, intellectually enhanced and previously non-sapient animals, and others. Indeed, some genetically modified humans and cyborgs, individuals whose bodies are integrated with functional artificial components, are among us today. And the imperative for recognizing their rights as obviously intelligent and self-aware entities is both strong and urgent. The above discussion of intelligence is only a beginning, and indeed, the systematic consideration of intelligence, free from the preconceptions that limited it during the times when human minds were the only apparent manifestations of certain levels of intelligence, is quite a novel endeavor. A key insight that is already apparent from such explorations, however, is that intelligence is not fixed or static. Just as the development of artificial intelligence can give rise to wondrous and astonishing new possibilities, so is the intelligence of the human fundamentally improvable and without rigid boundaries. What the biological human brain might not be able to fathom or perform unaided, technology, in symbiosis with the brain, might be able to accomplish nonetheless. Indeed, the merger of biological and artificial intelligence in the form of smart devices, brain and nervous system implants, and even non-invasive brain stimulation in the not too distant future could enhance human intellectual capabilities in ways that take us well beyond the historic human range of potential altogether. Frederick read this article prior to our conversation today, and he has some thoughts about it. But now, Frederick, I will turn it over to you. I will ask you, what thoughts do you have to share about intelligence, about consciousness, and about the article that I wrote? Please go ahead.
Thank you for the privilege. The article is a very great article. I really learned some insights from that article. You said a lot in the article, and some of the striking remarks that you made, one of the take-home remarks I took from the article that you wrote, you said intelligence is an emergent property of certain matter arranged in an intricately complex ways. This particular point envisage many other points about intelligence, what intelligence really entails in its real sense. From this definition, for what you just described intelligence to be, you mean that intelligence is a property that exists to create another property, if I may paraphrase the statement that you made. And according to my own definition, the way I paraphrase it, I believe that Renan Descartes in 1637 in his book, in a Discourse of Method, he said, I think, therefore I am. So by the time you juxtapose your definition with Renan Descartes' definition of what intelligence and consciousness is, then I believe that intelligence is not just an emergent property. Intelligence is an emergent entity as well. Because for you to become intelligent or for you to become conscious, you have to first of all assume the state of intelligence to become conscious. So in his book, let me reference back in his book, in this Renan Descartes' book in 1937, in 1637 rather, he said, I think, therefore I am. So there is two states of duality when someone wants to become conscious or translate from being an intelligent person to being a conscious person. First off is you have to think. And when you think, then you become. So when you correlate what your definition of what intelligence means as an emergent property, then that means we say intelligence is a dual state that translates someone from a state of intelligence to a state of what? Consciousness. So for an entity to become intelligent, that entity must have assumed the state of what? Consciousness. So that is what I want to say for now.
Yes, thank you for those remarks. And you are referring to René Descartes and his famous dictum, I think, therefore I am. So Descartes was in the 17th century attempting to figure out what does he know for certain about reality, and then utilize those certain propositions to derive other true propositions. And he started out by saying, well, I know that I'm thinking, and because I'm thinking, I therefore can deduce that I exist. And thus, to him, the thinking was primary in essence. It is that from which he was able to arrive at all other aspects, all other concepts and propositions within his framework. Now, that's an epistemological approach. Epistemology tries to address how do you know what you know. Now, the distinction I think that does need to be made is between the epistemological and the metaphysical. So the metaphysical is essentially what exists fundamentally as part of reality. And I do think we exist. I do think that we think, and our thoughts objectively exist, in the sense that there are counterparts in reality that are affected in the process of our thinking. So we have brains, and within our brains, there are chemical processes, biological processes that essentially represent our thoughts. Our thoughts are made possible by those processes. So what I characterize as the emergent property of intelligence is essentially the fact that intelligence does depend on a certain arrangement of matter. And let me here produce the particular quotation from my article. Intelligence is an emergent property of matter, arranged in certain intricately complex ways, just as life, consciousness, and volition are emergent properties as well, though distinct from intelligence. So what I'm trying to point out about intelligence is that there are physical prerequisites to it. Like, you need to have matter arranged in certain ways. You need to have systems that are arranged in certain ways, whether those be the biological human brains, or in the case of AI, you need to have a system that's programmed in a certain way. It needs to have hardware that it runs on. And the intelligence emerges if you get the hardware right, if you get the programming right, just like intelligence in a biological brain emerges if the brain has the right physical structures. But if it doesn't, if instead of a biological brain, it's a block of wood, or it's a block of wood that's carved to look like a brain, it still won't think like a brain. So what are your thoughts on that, on the distinction between the metaphysical and the epistemological, and the fact that intelligence has these physical prerequisites, and that is how I see it as an emergent property that manifests itself when these physical prerequisites are in a certain configuration?
My thought is that the metaphysical, in the sense of metaphysical, intelligence should be more, according to what I derive from your definition, intelligence should be more tangible, more solid, in the sense that reality needs to act on that, on intelligence, for it to manifest. That means for an entity to become intelligent, there must be a manifestation that happens in the core of that entity. So that's what the metaphysical dimension of intelligence should be. And in the ontological aspect of intelligence should happen in the substrate dimension of it. So I think an entity of reasoning becomes a being when intelligence begins to manifest in that entity. And it is largely dependent upon what that entity is trying to think about, or is trying to exert its mind or its cognitive ability or capacity around. So that is what I think the intelligence is in general form. Intelligence can also bring about proactivity. For an entity to be intelligent, it must be proactive. In the state of proactivity, that is where we ascend into consciousness. Because without proactivity, you cannot really measure whether an entity or a property is really intelligent. So proactivity brings about the sense of existence of intelligence on an entity, and the ability for an entity to also commute from one state of reasoning to another state of reasoning is dependent upon how that entity can maneuver its way around the vicinity of intelligence or the locus of intelligence. So that is it for now, and that is what I can just say for now.
Yes, very interesting. Thank you for that response. So you are connecting intelligence with productivity, and you posit that productivity is a pathway for intelligence into consciousness. That is, an intelligent entity that exhibits productivity can become conscious. And I would like to explore that with you, because for me, consciousness is also an emergent property. And it's clear to me that some entities have it, we have it. Other living beings may have it. For instance, I think most animals are conscious. Certainly the higher animals are conscious. Birds are conscious too. Maybe insects are conscious to a more limited extent. But a rock is not conscious, and most likely a virus is not conscious. So there's some level of organization, some level of not just complexity, but specific kinds of complexity that gives rise to consciousness. I do have a statement in my article about this. I write, I am of the view that consciousness is certainly helpful to intelligence, but the two are nonetheless distinct. Intelligence refers to capabilities and functions which are externally, objectively observable, whereas consciousness requires an inner, subjective state of awareness. And I do think that, for instance, an animal, at least most animals, have that internal subjective state of awareness. Like if they look at food, for instance, they may not have a word for food, but they recognize it as something that they should pursue. And they have an inner awareness of it, or if they have senses like sight or hearing, they have conscious experience of the world. And we have conscious experience as well of our thoughts, of the concepts that we form in our minds. But my question to you is, let's say you have an intelligence, and an intelligence is doing productive things. So, for instance, you could have an AI system on a computer. You could have, say, ChatGPT, and ChatGPT can be doing productive things. It's generating text. It's generating text that is useful to people for whatever purposes they may intend it. But I would venture to say, and I think most people would agree with me, ChatGPT is not conscious. So it can do a lot of productive things for people, but it doesn't have internal self-awareness. It doesn't have any sort of sensory experience of the world. So where can we draw that distinction between intelligence and consciousness? Clearly, some intelligent entities are conscious, but others, like ChatGPT, at least I would posit ChatGPT is not conscious. So what are your thoughts on this distinction?
The moment for you to discover whether an entity is intelligent or not is when that entity hits the epiphany state. The epiphany state is just that the eureka state, or the aha moment. The aha moment whereby when you discover something, you get excited. There's this adrenaline rush that comes with it. That means you are discovering something. Because in my work with Ron Shefan, if you can know Ron Shefan, we did something about intelligence frame theory, where we are able to explain how we can frame intelligence from the biological aspect to the non-biological aspect. So for me, I think for an entity to become intelligent or conscious, that entity will assume the state of epiphany, the state of discovery, the state of the aha moment. Those states, those periods are the period that you can really measure that such entity is exhibiting intelligence and consciousness. Because intelligence is something you learn. You can easily get intelligence from people. But consciousness is the self-aware state of an entity. And in this self-aware state of an entity, that entity must be able to be what? Proactive. Proactivity also brings about the self-awareness of an entity to translate into the state of what? Consciousness. Then another one is vibrancy. For you to determine whether an entity is conscious of its environment or is intelligent is when that entity is vibrant. Vibrancy brings about beingness. For something to be vibrant, that means that thing is existing and that thing is conscious of its surrounding and is conscious of what it's doing within that surrounding space. According to one of my definition here, I said intelligence driven by consciousness makes one an identity transform. That is, a non-fixed entity that has the tendency to transition into a variable. So intelligence can easily push someone from that state of inactivity into a state of what? Activity, which makes you what? Conscious. And which gives you what? An identity what? Transform. It gives that entity an identity what? Transform. So that is what I think is happening in that regard.
Yes, thank you for your answer. So a mark of intelligence manifesting consciousness, in your view, is this epiphany state, the
Yes.
aha moment, the experience of making this kind of discovery that profoundly affects one. It seems this is an emotional state as well, to have an epiphany. You also mention proactivity, being proactive, and that bringing about self-awareness. So if an entity were to pursue some aspect of the world that is important to its survival, like an animal that pursues food, we think an animal that pursues food is conscious, it's being proactive in whatever steps it takes, whatever actions it takes to get that food. You also mention vibrancy, and that's an interesting concept as well. Now, my question to you is, would it be possible for an outsider, you or me, looking at an entity to determine if that entity has experienced that epiphany, that aha moment, or if that entity has this quality of vibrancy that you describe? Would it be possible for me to look at some being, some entity, and say, yes, this being has had an epiphany, and therefore I can infer that this being is conscious, or this being has vibrancy, I can infer that this being is conscious? And if I would be able to tell that, how would I be able to tell it?
How you can spot whether an entity is intelligent or has assumed the state of the epiphany state is when action is required on every part of that intelligence. Because according to Isaac Newton, he said in every action there is equal and opposite what reaction. So since you are observing from the observer's frame, your frame of reference should be subjective to what you are observing, vice versa. So if your frame of reference or your local coordinate is different from what you are observing, then you cannot really determine whether what you are observing is really intelligent or not. So everything boils down to your local frame of reference, where you are observing intelligence, when you are observing the entities from. You understand? Whether it's a subjective observation or a relative observation or a global observation. So it depends on your local frame of reference, the point where you are observing the entity from. That is what we determine, we give you the determinants to know whether this entity is really assuming the state of epiphany, or really assuming the state of what consciousness, or really assuming the state of self-awareness. So that is it. So everything boils down to personal data driven from what? Gotten from self-referential observation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your response. And the reason why I brought up this question of how would an external observer be able to determine if an intelligent entity has consciousness is because I think this will be quite a relevant matter to address in future decades, especially as artificial intelligence advances. And in my article, I mention that there is a serious possibility of artificial general intelligence emerging during the first half of the 21st century. And therefore, I write, it is crucial for humans to consider how to act in regard to an entity that manifests not just domain-specific intelligence, but intelligence across most or all domains of human endeavor. Should an assumption of consciousness be made concerning such entities, even if the mechanisms of consciousness within them have not been completely elucidated? So when we deal with especially more advanced AI systems than the ones that exist currently, we may need to make a determination at what point those entities are conscious. So I think right now, the entities that exist, the AI systems that we work with, like ChatGPT or say Midjourney, are not conscious. They are narrow AI tools, or the algorithms used to operate self-driving cars are not conscious. They are very sophisticated tools. You could say they're intelligent, but they're not conscious and they don't need to be treated like persons. But at some point, we may have a general intelligence, an AI, that acts very plausibly as if it were conscious in multiple domains. What if artificial general intelligences are developed in the next several decades? How will we know whether they are conscious or not? So, Ben, while we are waiting for Frederick to reconnect, what thoughts might you share with our audience as to your reactions to what you heard him say thus far about the connection between intelligence and consciousness?
I do like that statement by Descartes many centuries back, that it's kind of hard to know anything other than that since I am able to think, I exist. I kind of liked how I first learned what that meant, and maybe how we can't really know anything else going on, like everything else around us could just be a simulation. And I guess I know that, Gennady, you as a materialist, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that since you feel like others are going through a comparable experience to you, that this world that we live in is real and everybody is thinking and then does in fact exist because of that, it does start to get really challenging as these machine counterparts of ours start to display a more and more convincing situation that they might also be thinking. Are they feeling something inside, or are the inputs just being merely translated into outputs without anything volitional going on within? I'm not sure if we are saying now that some machines have passed the Turing test. If I'm not mistaken, it might just be that they take a little longer to respond in a way that does make us think that no, they could be responding as a normal human would. So I'm curious, like, when that, all right, well, they passed the Turing test, but maybe they're not anywhere close to conscious just yet. I wonder how far apart those two are, or when Turing came up with that scenario, how close he thought passing the Turing test would be to having achieved consciousness. I'll leave my thoughts there for the moment.
Yes, thank you, Ben. And those are indeed worthwhile questions to ponder and areas to consider. So on the first area, in regard to what I would consider to essentially justify the view that other people are conscious, it is essentially my physicalist view of the world that you referred to. So Descartes says, I think, therefore I am. To that, I will add, the fact that I am able to think is made possible by my biology. So I can infer, therefore, that people with comparable biological attributes are also able to think. So in regard to your second point, Ben, about the Turing test and the observation that many have made that today's narrow AI systems, the large language models, have in some cases passed the Turing test in the sense that they were able to convince humans that they are indeed human, that some humans have not been able to successfully distinguish between interacting with an actual human and interacting with an AI system. Some humans have been fooled by LLM chatbots, for example. So one could say that is passing the Turing test. But that outcome of the humans being fooled took place in a very specific set of circumstances. So it's not like somebody encountered a large language model out in the wild just by, say, going to a grocery store, and there's a large language model that was able to fool them into thinking that it was a human. Because, of course, the large language models, they don't have bodies, they don't have the human form, etc. So it's just in a very narrow, specific context of interacting in the form of a chat on a computer screen that the verbal output of these large language models was able to fool some people into thinking that they were human. But the large language models, again, don't have the physical structures by which we could even say that they're a unitary entity, because they're distributed across many servers, for instance. And if you saw their exact physical layout, where all the hardware is, where all of the processes are running, you wouldn't be fooled into thinking that that was a human. So I think the Turing test is a benchmark for how far intelligence has advanced. And certainly that is a milestone that I think has been exceeded. But it's not a benchmark for consciousness necessarily. And this is where I would like to bring Frederick in again. So the question that I have is, while we know, I think, with a good deal of confidence that today's large language models or other AI systems are not conscious, like ChatGPT is not conscious, or the software operating an autonomous vehicle is not conscious. What happens once we do get AGI, artificial general intelligence, by which I mean an intelligent system that is capable of learning without being prompted to do so, an entirely new domain of endeavor, just like humans can learn various different skill sets, various different domains. At what point do we need to consider, is this entity now conscious? Would an artificial general intelligence necessarily be conscious? Or would it have to meet certain other criteria, even if it's an AGI, it can learn a variety of things? Would there be some other attributes that it would need to have before we would say, yes, it's conscious?
Okay, thanks for the question. I love the question that you just posed to me. I think for we to arrive at that point of artificial general intelligence, it will take a lot of effort, because for now, currently, the current technologies that we have, the current LLMs that we have, the large language models that we have, we cannot really say they can express, can achieve, accelerate consciousness. They can't, because what we have is just software that are working together that does not have emotions. So the only time that we can arrive at artificial general intelligence is when software begins to have emotions, and which is very hard, because it is not easy for we to inscribe consciousness into softwares, because all these things are just technologies. They are just technologies, human-made technologies, that are, like, for example, a parameter, a human parameter that is being inscribed into a synthetic entity. So before we to achieve general intelligence, it will take a long way, because general intelligence in its context is subjective to reality. For example, now, what we assume as a general intelligence might be different for what I assume to be an intelligence. So there should be, for we to achieve a general intelligence, it will take a long way, because the current softwares that we have, the current language models that we have, they don't have emotions. All we have are pre-trained transformers that can mimic human experience in form of software engineering. So getting to artificial general intelligence will take years. It will take years, because we can't just say because ChatGPT is giving us cheap answers, then we have arrived at general intelligence. No, it's until large language models begin to exert human emotions into what they are doing, in a global form, let's say in a global context, that is when we have arrived at artificial general intelligence. For now, no software has emotions. So it is when software starts having emotions, that is when we can now say, okay, we have achieved general intelligence. For now, we are still playing around, we are still beating around the bush. We are just making effort. And I think with much research, much collaboration across the world, with years to come, we can achieve that. But for now, we can't achieve it, because large language models are just software, pieces of software. They don't have emotions, they can't react, they don't have learning curves like human, because humans, we have emotions, we have experience, we are subjective to our environment, But these things, they are not subjective to anything. They are just subjective to human prompt, human query. So that is it for now.
Yes, thank you for your answer. And I do agree with you that large language models do not have emotions and they are just pieces of software. I do not think they can be conscious given their present design. Now, what is interesting is that you consider emotions to be a prerequisite of consciousness. So, first, an entity would need to develop emotions, not just to become conscious, but to have general intelligence. So, it appears to me that you don't believe it would be possible for an AGI, an artificial general intelligence, to be developed unless AI comes to have emotions. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, 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 yes. 100% yes, yes.
Okay, very good. So I understand you correctly then. It's interesting too that there was an AI project, an AI system called Uplift that existed in the early 2020s. So Uplift was what was called a mediated artificial intelligence, and it actually had a team of human mediators around it. So Uplift could communicate via email, and it would be able to receive emails. It would take some time to process a response to those emails. But the purpose of the human mediator or team of mediators was to assign a set of emotional valences to the content of the emails that Uplift received, and then also to assign emotional valences to the responses that Uplift would generate. And that's all the mediators did. So Uplift would generate its own responses, but the mediators would essentially set up the configuration of human emotions, human-like emotions that this entity would operate with. And my understanding of the theory behind it was that the team that ran Uplift actually also thought that having emotions was a prerequisite for an artificial general intelligence. And that team tried to engineer emotions into an AI through the use of these human mediators who understood what these emotions were about and could impart those emotions to the AI. So this was already attempted. Now, unfortunately, Uplift was discontinued, I think around 2022, if I'm not mistaken, but we did have a virtual Enlightenment Salon about Uplift in 2021, and that was a fascinating conversation. Now, I wanted to get your thoughts on how you think it might be possible to engineer an AI that has emotions. So emotions, you say, are a prerequisite to consciousness or general intelligence. What could be done to program an AI or design an AI or even design hardware that's conducive to that so that the AI has emotions?
I think for we to achieve this, we have to be able to train AIs, language models that can simplify their structure, their parent structure, in the sense that it's not just about just engineering software. We need to create a parent software that can be able to engineer these emotions into AI by iterating the emotions, because naturally we humans, we are medium, we have many mediums, but large language models does not have mediums because they are only interacting based on what they are fed into. But as human being, we have a lot of mediums within us as an entity. So we need to build a structure that can support the existence of emotion within LLMs, which I can, let me say, large emotion models. We need to build a large emotion models, not just large language models. So the age of building using a large language models should face out. We need to usher in a new aspect, which is called large emotion models. We need to build large emotion models that can support the capacity for artificial intelligence to be able to be emotive, conscious, and responsive to local experiences, be engineered into them. So that is it. So we need to build a large emotion models, LEM, not large language models. Thank you.
A large emotion model, or LEM. So that is the first time I've heard of that concept, but it's an intriguing concept, and it does seem to be aligned with what the developers of Uplift were trying to do. Here's the link for our virtual Enlightenment Salon on Uplift from May 23rd, 2021. Please check it out. And now I would like to invite Ben Ballweg to ask any questions of Frederick or make any remarks in regard to what has been said thus far.
Just to dovetail straight from this, I've heard or some such that if we could maybe program LLMs to be able to experience pain, that might be one way to help them feel risk and reward, even if that could be potentially ethically bad, to give them the ability to feel pain. It's a curious question if we want to give them that ability, or if the pain that they could experience would not be offset by the meaning of life that they might get from experiencing pain. But from that, I'll go to a question I had for you, Frederick, from before we started talking today. This is a convoluted and very possibly naive question. It sounds like you believe that we are not yet with AGI. So I'll ask for, what's your best evidence that we don't yet have AGI? And then conversely, if you could pretend that you thought, well, maybe we do have AGI, what is your best evidence that we do have AGI?
Okay, nice question. My own answer to this is that once, as I said now, for we to discover that we have arrived at AGI is when softwares like LMMs begin to discover their epiphanies. Do you understand? Because in the epiphany state, that is where everything borders on. That is where we can discover whether an entity is really conscious or is not conscious. The current elements that we have is not conscious. It's just trying to repeat, regurgitate what humans fed them into with, rather. So AGI, for we to arrive at AGI, we need to discover a lot of things in the aspect of emotions, human emotions, whereby these machines can easily interact with humans in a relative scale. That means our AGI should be scale specific, not just domain specific. That is when we have arrived at AGI. It must be scale specific. What are those things that these elements can do without human supervision, without human interaction? They can really display all these things without us giving them command, without us telling them what to do. That is when we have known that we have arrived at what? AGI. Have I answered your question, sir?
Yes, it looks like Ben is nodding his head, but Ben, at any future point, please feel free to follow up. One follow-up area that I have is in regard to a comment that you made, Ben, about whether an AI should be engineered to experience pain, and pain is a negative sensation. There could be a variety of negative emotions as well, that an entity that experiences emotions more generally would likely need to be capable of experiencing. But of course, in humans, those negative emotions can lead to great harm and great detriment. So emotions like anger or jealousy or frustration, disappointment, some of those emotions definitely have a place. But we have seen, of course, numerous examples of those emotions either emerging irrationally or being abused in some way, leading to bad outcomes for people. So my question would be, if these LEMs are built, the large emotion models, if emotion is engineered into AIs, how do we avoid the same negative side effects, the same fallout that emotions have led to in humans? I would be interested in your outlook on this. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose that psychological pain could be as much a struggle and as much a motivator for these LEMs as pain could. Yeah, I suppose when you start to get into, well, if you can engineer pain in or you can engineer emotions in, like if there's still not anything behind the pain going on or the negative emotions going on. As Frederick was talking, I was reminded of the quote. It's something like, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, did the tree really fall? Maybe the analogy I'm making in my head is from Frederick saying something like, if the machine keeps thinking or something, even when not interacting with a human, even when it's not performing for a human, that would be maybe the indicator that something was going on within rather than it was just reacting to a prompt that it had received. So,
Yes.
Sorry, I veered away a little bit, but
thank you for your thoughts,
Yes.
Ben. And Frederick, what are your thoughts about pain or negative emotions being part potentially of LEMs or other future AIs? Do you think that's a wise set of attributes to program into AIs, or could it be dangerous for AIs to be able to have negative experiences or negative emotions? Just like with humans, there are clear adverse side effects of humans having negative emotions.
I think it's very dangerous, very lethal, because once artificial intelligence has the capability to express emotions just like human beings, then we are in danger, we are in soup, because these machines will be able to proliferate all these things and make it more organized. They'll be able to overrule humans. Do you understand? They can easily displace humans in the civilization, because once all these elements becomes conscious, have emotions, they are very lethal to us, and we need to watch our back, because then we don't have any say again, because we can't control them again, because they are not the one controlling themselves. And that means human being will be at the lower cadre of civilization, and it will bring that civilization to the barest minimum, and human being will start being a servitude, a slave to artificial beings, to artificial entities, which is very wrong. And I don't think whether there is any research whereby we can engineer emotions. The only thing we can only do is to program. We can't engineer emotion. We can't engineer the real human emotions into software entities like LLM. So it will take a long years to achieve that. And even the current research that we have has not really done justice. We are just trying to mimic all these things and trying to just massage our ego that we have arrived at AGI. You understand? But now we have not even achieved anything at that scale. We are just trying to still understand how we can engineer human emotions into what software entities. Just like I said, we need large emotion models, which will complement LLM, large language models, for we to achieve what? Artificial general intelligence.
Thank you for your response. So I understand it to be a nuanced position. You are worried about what would happen if artificial intelligence came to have emotions. So if these large emotion models were to be developed, you would be concerned that the AIs would become motivated and sufficiently capable to actually render humans subservient to them. However, you also think that it is such a challenge to actually create these LEMs, to actually engineer emotions, genuine emotions, into AI systems successfully, instead of just mimicking emotions as today's LLMs do, that this kind of technology, the large emotion models, is quite far away, still decades away. And as a result, we don't have to worry about AI enslaving humans anytime soon. Right now, what we have are essentially tools, software, large language models that are not conscious and that we can still control as tools. A lot of AI experts would use the term narrow AI for those kinds of models. So would you say that's accurate in your view, that for the next several decades, we will just be dealing with narrow AI as tools that will not be conscious, that will not experience emotions themselves.
That is why I said that is when we converge, when we reach that singularity point where synthetic emotions can easily assume the state of natural emotions. That is when we can achieve that, because as I said now, technology to develop this is not in place yet, because we need to build softwares that can simplify their structure internally without human intervention or human supervision. Software that can simplify their structures without human supervision. But the current software that we have now, they depend on human supervision to function, human oversight to function. So now we have not really achieved enough to say that we are already in the age of what? Artificial general intelligence. So until we can build software that can simplify their structure, their emotional structure, their experience, that is when we can now give an okay that we have truly achieved artificial general intelligence. Because when an entity is capable or has the potential to simplify its structures, that means that entity is self-aware, that entity is localized, that entity is global, because human beings, we are both local and global. We can reason from a place, from one point to another, and from that same point to another point. But synthetic intelligence or artificial intelligence to say cannot do that. They can only reason narrowly, as you said in your write-up, and they are domain specific. So until they are scale specific, that is when we can say we are now approaching the age of artificial general intelligence, or let me say they can simplify their structure. That is when we can also say we have achieved a large scale of artificial general intelligence. But for now, we only have software that can't do that. They are just mimickers. They can just mimic. They cannot simplify their structure, their experience, their immediate capacity to reason. They don't think, they just hallucinate. So until we can build softwares that can simplify their structure, then we have achieved their structure in a large scale, from not just from an imaginary dimension, but to a real dimension. Because as a mathematician, I'm a trained mathematician. Because anything that happens in the imaginary world can be able to we can able to translate that thing from the imaginary world into the world to real world. So if the current elements that we have can be able to simplify their structure in a large scale outside of the vicinity of the imaginary space they are, into the real space, which is the human space. Because we human beings, we can do both. We can be imaginary and we can be real at the same time. But the elements that we have are just imaginary entities that just reason from the place of engineering perspective, not natural perspective. Because there's a difference between engineering perspective and natural perspective. Natural perspective is subjective. Engineering perspective is objective. Is what you engineer that you see. But what you naturalize is what you experience. That is my take for now.
Yes, thank you for that response. So it seems that there is another criterion that we can use to determine whether an entity has become an artificial general intelligence, and that is whether it can re-engineer itself to simplify its own structure. And certainly no AIs today are capable of that. Now, also, I agree with you that to be a true artificial general intelligence, an entity would need to be able to learn a new skill, a new domain without human supervision, without being told to, without being guided to learn that. And again, we don't have any systems capable of that or even close to capable of that today. Now, I did want to ask you in regard to whether it may be possible if in the more distant future these large emotion models are developed to align their emotions to respect humans, to be attuned to genuine human well-being and genuine human needs. Because there are some theoreticians who say, yes, we need emotions as a prerequisite of general intelligence, but they think it's possible to create AI systems that experience emotions that are benevolent toward humanity. Like they would care about humans. They would care about humans in similar ways to how humans might care about other humans, except maybe better, except maybe without some of the drawbacks of human emotions that I discussed. Do you think it may be possible in the future to create AI systems that do experience emotions, but their emotions toward humans are those of benevolence? So they wouldn't want to enslave humans. They would want to improve the world so as to improve the living conditions of humans. So humans could lead better lives with the help of these AIs.
Thanks for the question. My response to this question is that for we to achieve artificial general intelligence and for it to be a beneficiary to humans in a large scale is dependent on the programmers at the back end. The programmers are the ones that will determine, because what you engineer that you will see. So we need to have humans, those that are programming or engineering this software, to be humans that has empathy. Because if the programmers does not have empathy, they can't engineer an entity that has empathy. So it's largely dependent upon those behind the engineering, the creation, the design of this software. And I try to visit the concepts which I call software-pathic AIs. Software-pathic AIs are AIs that should be developed by humans that have human empathy. Humans that have human empathy. Those are the people that are supposed to design AIs that can easily be beneficiary to humans. Because at the end of the day, we are the one engineering these things. We are the one designing these things. So it depended upon we as a human being, what we put into these things is what they will act upon. As I said, and I say in every action, there is equal and opposite what reaction. That's what Isaac Newton said in one of his quotes. So it's based on what we put into these AI softwares that they will react upon. If we put evil intentions into them, they will react with evil intentions. If we put bad intention into them, they will react with bad intentions. If we put good intentions into them, they will react with good intentions. So design or the creation of such software that can easily proliferate or duplicate human emotion in a scale that is beneficiary to human being is dependent on the what? On the creators and the designers, not the system itself, because is what the system is fed into, is what the system will run with, because the system is subjective to human what? Creation. And human creation is the manifestation of everything that bothers around emotion, human emotion. So for we to create something, we have to have an emotion into it. We have to be able to be emotionally tied to that thing. So that is what I'm trying to say. So humans that develop all these programs, all these softwares, need to have emotions so that this AI at the end of the day, they will be beneficiary to us, because it's what we fed into these systems is what they will react upon according to the law of Isaac Newton. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for your comments. And in many ways, this is an encouraging perspective, because you are saying it does depend on us humans, and in particular on the humans who design these AI systems. And if these AI systems of the future are going to have emotions, the emotions of the human developers will have an impact on what emotions those AIs, the large emotion models, are going to have. And if the human developers have benevolent emotions in abundance, if they are guided by empathy, if they are guided by emotions that favor human well-being, pro-social emotions, pro-human emotions, then the AI systems that they develop will come to have those emotions as well. And then those AI systems, being as capable and powerful as they are, will utilize that capability for the benefit of humankind. So that is an inspiring possibility, and it's a humanistic way of looking at AI. So we are transhumanists, but as part of being a transhumanist, one should be a humanist. So we are humanists as well. And by looking at the matters affecting our society and the design of our technologies from a human-centered perspective, including emotions of empathy, benevolence, compassion, we can thereby hope that the artificial general intelligence systems that eventually get designed will reflect those emotions. So thank you for that, Frederick. I appreciate those insights. Now, Ben, I'm curious if you have any feedback here. I'd be interested in your thoughts.
I think that equal and opposite reaction reference point and about like simplifying their own structure. I suppose that the simplifying their own structure part, that does make me think of like synthesizing, or that's not quite the right word, but just being able to take a lot of information and still not quite the right word, coalesce, distill it down into the necessary bits for us as humans or for AI to be able to do what they're looking to do without needing to weed through as much information to be able to do it. So I do find that kind of curious. I'd be interested to hear more about that equal and opposite reaction. And I do hope that these AI are getting programmed the right way for humanity's benefit. I suppose for having high hopes for how AI could be developed, Gennady, I suppose you could share in the chat at this point about the thinking game. This was proposed in our friend David Wood's LinkedIn feed. He is most optimistic of AI developing correctly if Demis Hassabis's direction for it, and Demis and his team can be credited with AlphaFold and us being able to have figured out and done as much as we have with understanding the structure of proteins and all that does for being able to design drugs and other ways to fight numerous human ailments, aging amongst them. I suppose kind of last thought about how AGI could be developed, and maybe if I can put this back to you, Frederick. In light of how near we might be to the unfathomable superpower of AGI, I'm concerned with the seeming dissolution of many of the societal norms we'd been taking for granted. In what ways do you see the arrival of AGI exacerbating such dissolution? And in what ways do you see that AGI could restore the good norms and leave out the bad ones so that humanity could enter its next stage of development and flourish, rather than entering the dystopia that so much sci-fi fears, or worse, to succumb to the great filter? Sorry, that's a lot of question. Well, what do you think, Gennady?
Yes. Well, Ben, that's an excellent question. And again, it speaks to how AI may ultimately be a reflection of what humans put into it. And right now, we can see that with the large language models or the generative AI models, what outputs they give people are dependent on the vast sea of inputs that they receive from the internet, and the internet has some wonderful aspects to it, and the internet has some horrible aspects to it. And essentially, these AI systems contain within themselves the potential to generate outputs that are truly conducive to human flourishing, or outputs that are deleterious or destructive, like deep fakes or worse. So even today, there's this possibility that humans with bad intentions could abuse the AI tools that are available today and create outputs that are harmful, that amplify the negative tendencies of some humans. So I think in the future, this set of possibilities will become amplified in both directions. And the question is, again, will humans at large have the wisdom, have the foresight to use these tools in ways that reflect and bring out the best within us, the best human attributes. So I can think of many ways in which AI could improve culture rather than lead to cultural deterioration. For instance, AI can contribute to an artistic renaissance or a renaissance of musical creation. And some people might say, well, AI just recombines whatever is there. But a lot of creativity is recombination and finding novel combinations that nobody has quite put together in the same way could be a great example of and catalyst for further creativity. So a human might see a piece of art that was created with the help of AI, or might listen to AI generated music that human finds genuinely inspiring, and that human might derive some ideas from that for their own creations, whether or not they then use AI. Likewise, people could use AI to do research. Of course, they have to do some fact checking. They have to make sure that the information they receive is not a hallucination, but sometimes the AI will suggest valid avenues of research to consider. Sometimes AI will create interesting scenarios for stories, and all of those can be used potentially for human benefit, for cultural enrichment. And I think the intentionality with which AI is used is also quite important. So when somebody goes online and seeks to use a large language model or a generative AI tool, what are they seeking to use it for? Is that a moral purpose, an ethical purpose, a purpose that contributes to human flourishing? So now that we have Frederick back, Ben, could you pose your question to him as well?
So, Frederick, if I may, I wonder how optimistic are you that AGI will help the world be a better place? Or are you rather pessimistic that maybe this is such a powerful tool that if there are those in power that can get more of it, access to more of it, that would just make the world even more unequal than it already is?
Okay, I think from my own perspective, AGI will bring abundance. It will bring about the acceleration of research in medicine, discovering new research about disease, how to cure disease, how to all the disease like HIV, cancer, etc., all these things. So it will be very much beneficial in that regard. The bad side of it is that AGI will give autonomy to the rich, only the rich, because only the rich will be able to access all these things. It's already around the world. You can see what is going on in the world. Some powerful people, some super rich, some super wealthy people around the world are already trying to take over free speech. And the only man that is trying to give an open source avenue or platform is Elon Musk, using his X platform to be able to disseminate information. But at the same time, X free speech is not really open source in that sense, because Elon Musk also has his own intention as a super wealthy person. So the super rich will take advantage of the negative side of AGI for their own benefit, not for the benefit of all. Not for the benefit of all, because at the end of the day, there will be a disparity in equality between the rich and the have not and the ones that does not have at all. So there will be a disparity. AI will create a disparity, even though AI is bringing something beneficial to human in terms of medical sciences or engineering sciences. It will also bring about income disparity, gender disparity, like that, etc. So there will be a lot of disparity between the poor, the rich in the coming future, even with the words that many analysts across the world have said that AI will bring about an utopia, that everybody will live. There will be a universal basic distribution of universal basic income evenly across the world. All those things are just social media hype. They are just media hype just to make people to feel good that the future of artificial intelligence is all abundant, is all about freedom. No, it's not all about freedom. It will create a chasm, a gap between the rich and the ones that does not have in the future. But the most salient benefit we bring it will bring about the cure of so many diseases that in our generation we can't cure, because there's a lot going on already. And I think the AI researchers across the world are doing their best to see that happen. So that is my take for now.
Yes, thank you, Frederick. And again, you've provided a nuanced perspective in that you believe AI, as it advances, will have many beneficial results in terms of bringing about cures to diseases that currently inflict so much suffering and misery and that currently shorten people's lifespans. And curing those diseases will be a great boon to humankind. You are concerned about inequalities being exacerbated due to AI and the super rich becoming vastly more powerful as a result of AI technologies relative to the general population. Now, one thought that I would have is, if it is true that inequalities get exacerbated, but the people who are poor today or who are less well off today still become significantly better off because they get to live longer or they're healthier, they don't have to deal with these diseases. Is that still a better world than the world we live in today? So if all of us live reliably past the age of 100, say, but there are some super rich people who are immensely better off and immensely more powerful as a result, is that still a better world than the world of today, where so many people suffer from terrible life-shortening diseases?
I think it's a better world. It will be a better world because everybody will have the ability to escape into longevity, because human beings we have lifespan, and with the introduction of, or the emergence of artificial intelligence, it will enable human beings to live longer, because a lot of things will be being under the burner already relating to that. There will be abundance. But at the same time, to access this abundance will be limited. We only be limited because those that will access this are those that are wealthy. They are the wealthy people. They are the ones that will access it. Even when you live long, you not have the ability to what, to be able to take care of yourself, because there's already opportunity going on. But artificial intelligence will bring about those opportunities. But those opportunities will not be democratized. It will only be shared among the super wealthy, the super rich among us. And this is what we need to be fighting for. We need to create a policy around that before we eventually coming into the age of artificial general intelligence. So we need to create a policy, a law, a regulation that is very strong, that can protect the equality of people around the world. Not just the civilized world, even the uncivilized world. There's a need to carry everybody along so that the world will be what? Unified. Because currently the world is not unified. Let me just be frank.
Yes. Thank you for your thoughts, Frederick. So you are advocating for a policy framework that should be developed, hopefully prior to the emergence of artificial general intelligence, to ensure that the benefits of AGI are accessible to large numbers of people. And I am curious as to your thoughts regarding what some components of that framework would be, because in the U.S. Transhumanist Party, we deliberate over these kinds of policy questions as one of our primary tasks. So we would like to know any insights that you might share as to what some components of those policies might be, such that when future AI systems are developed, their benefits, including any benefits such as greater longevity, greater health, greater material abundance, are made available to all.
That is when, if there's the research towards artificial intelligence, should be open source to the third world economy at the same, because it should not be only the civilized world like the US, the Chinese, they are only the one doing the research. It should be open source so that everybody can tap into the abundance inherent in artificial general intelligence in the future. Because it look as if it's only people that are in the US, only people that are in China, only people in Russia, only people in Israel that have the access to all this, or only people in the UK that have access. It should be an open source whereby everybody can tap into the abundance. And from there, we can do it collectively and push for artificial super intelligence, because we are still in the age of AI. Then after AI, we have artificial general intelligence. Then the last phase will be artificial super intelligence. So for we to reach that frontier, we need to build that policy system, workable policy system that is accommodative, that can accommodate everyone, no matter where you come from, no matter your race, your creed, your status, your socio-economic standing. Because also in the advanced world, there are also inequalities among the population. Do you understand? There is also inequality. So we need to strike a balance in that regard, so that everybody will have access, free access to an open source future in the coming age. That's what I want to say.
Yes, thank you, Frederick. I agree with you that the open source approach to the development of AI systems is the one that is best suited for bringing about vast abundance that can be made available to the general population. Because if the AI models are open source, if they're free to use by anyone in the world potentially, and free to contribute to by anyone in the world without regard for national boundaries. So a promising engineer in Nigeria or in China or in the United States can contribute to the extent of their skill sets without regard for race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, any of those circumstantial attributes. If all of the skills, all of the talents of these people throughout the world can be utilized to improve these AI systems and to impart the best of humanity to those AI systems, then yes, there's a greater probability that these AI systems can benefit all of humankind. So develop them in an open source manner and allow as many people in the world as possible to freely benefit from their outputs. I appreciate that vision. It's an inspiring vision. It will require some persuasion, because a lot of people in the Western world right now are so worried about other countries developing AI systems that outcompete those in the United States, and they see it as a national competition. Or some people think that it's too dangerous to have open source AI systems because not all the risks can be controlled for in that setting, so they'd rather trust a few large corporations to build AI models. But I am very sympathetic to open source transnational collaboration in the development of AI systems, because that is generally a more benevolent mode of functioning. And if it's a more benevolent mode of functioning, as you said, the AIs will come to take on the characteristics of the humans who develop them. So AIs developed in this more benevolent, collaborative mode of functioning will themselves more likely turn out to be more benevolent and collaborative. What are your thoughts on that, Frederick?
I think it's just a free way of pushing all those things. So AI is just in that AI, because artificial intelligence is all we need. We just need to build that around that, so that the world will be safe for everyone. And at the same time, humanity will strive more in wealth than in penury.
Yes. Thank you very much. And I understand that your time is short right now. I want to give you the opportunity to share any final remarks that you might have with our viewers.
Hello, viewers. We all not should be scared that artificial intelligence is coming to take our place, but we should just appreciate the effort, that the research that is going on, and embrace what is coming in front of us. And at the same time, let's be open to embracing artificial intelligence, no matter how it is. The phobia of artificial intelligence is coming to take over human beings should be taken off. And let's just keep on believing that the world will become a better place at the end of the day. And disease, poverty will be taken away. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Frederick, for those words of inspiration and encouragement. Certainly, the world is undertaking some rapid changes right now AI is developing rapidly, and your message in parting is that we should not be afraid of these changes. We should embrace them. And despite the challenges, we should look forward to what that future world has to offer. And with that, thank you for coming to our virtual Enlightenment Salon. We wish you all the best, and we hope that you and all of our viewers will live long and prosper.